This is a talk on prioritizing panics. People want you to panic about all sorts of things. Just this week, I was asked to panic about 5G wireless, adding to the list of other things. So I figured, rather than dismiss it out of hand, I'd investigate 5G wireless. This involves an investigation of all radio frequency transmissions that are supposed to be injurious to human beings. Well, I'm a book guy, so I found a book by Joseph Mercola, whose books on vaccines and COVID I had enjoyed, also on health, to see what he had to say. The book is called RF for radio frequency. And his conclusion is that radio frequencies are damaging to us. That we didn't evolve to cope with radio frequencies, that there are more than a quadrillion times as many radio frequencies around as there were in our ancestors' day, and they're not good for us. What's his logic? He says that the radio frequency spectrum is huge, going from waves 1,000 kilometers long, that would be emitted by our electrical transmission lines, down to waves the size of an atom. That would be gamma rays coming from radiation. So in this huge, huge range, most of the stuff is what they call non-ionizing radiation, that is long wavelength, not powerful enough to knock electrons away from atoms, and ionizing radiation that will. Just about everything we deal with is in the safe, the non-ionizing, ionizing part of the spectrum, unlike X-rays and gamma rays and so on. But Mercola says not exactly so. Whereas the radio waves, the RF waves that are used in our cell phones, may not be able to knock electrons off of an atom, they achieve the same thing. Here's what they do. In our bodies, we use calcium. 2% of our bodies is calcium, the most abundant mineral there. This calcium is mostly structural, for teeth and bones. There's a tiny amount required in our cells for cellular metabolism. Now, what happens is that radio frequency, RF waves, allow the cell walls to emit more calcium than is good for them. When that calcium gets in there, it interferes with the operation of our mitochondria. Those are the parts of the cell that generate energy. And they result in oxidation products, and those oxidation products in turn can poison us. And what's the result? He says brain cancer, that's from your cell phone, and other cancers, breast cancer for women who carry their cell phones in their bras, and all sorts of cancers for kids who stand in front of the microwave too much. The three major household sources of radiation, the three greatest ones, are just those: cell phones, Wi-Fi, and microwaves. Baby monitors and some others count in there too. So he's explained what the problem is, how it is. Now, the people in charge of radiation safety will admit that there's a problem, but they don't know how much. In other words, most insurance carries a disclaimer saying that we don't cover you if you get injured by RF, but on the other hand, the FCC says that there's a safe level. What the safe level might be is a matter of disagreement, but they do agree that it's dangerous. Now, the FCC is in charge of protecting you and me. let me tell you how the FCC works, just like every other government agency. It gets its people who know about communications and safety from the industry. This is the people who produce cell phones, Wi-Fi routers, and who run communications companies. There's kind of a revolving door, they call it. You get a job in industry, then you go to government, then you go back to industry for a raise. You and me, the consumers who are supposed to be protected, are nowhere in this. So the FCC doesn't know you and me from Adam, but they do know the people that they're regulating pretty well, and they tend to be a little bit lenient. This is the way it works. In the progressive era of the United States, from 130 to 100 years ago, they passed all sorts of laws to protect consumers. They made two erroneous assumptions. One was that the consumers were intelligent, would appreciate and would care what the government was doing for them. And number two was that the government was honest and would look out for the citizens. Nah, the government people are mostly careerists. They're interested in advancement and money, and the consumers don't exactly care. So let's look at what happened in the progressive era. 1906, we had the Pure Food and Drug Act to keep our food and drugs clean. What's happened with food and drugs? Well, in food, we most recently have glyphosate, that's Roundup to you, an herbicide that's been used for 20 or 30 years because it helps grow GMO crops, and that's turned out to be dangerous. Prior to that, we had DDT. And as far as food goes, the healthiest fast food you can buy just about is Big Macs. That's an indictment. How about drugs? Well, they outlawed heroin and marijuana back in the day, and cocaine. But guess what? All of those things are readily available in the United States, and marijuana is now legal with the blessing of the federal government. More than that, the stuff that's illegal, heroin and now fentanyl and all sorts of other stuff, is readily available. We are drugging ourselves to death. Marijuana is now 30 times as strong as it was when I was a kid, and people are getting psychotic and going on mass shooting binges. What about other stuff they're supposed to regulate? They protect the consumer by preventing the banks from gouging them with loans. And insurance makes sure that they're properly protected. But if you look at the American landscape today, and this is Europe and just about everywhere in the world, their people are loaded with debt for car loans, student loans, mortgage debt that they will probably never repay. The mortgage industry has a cynical term, loan to own. They loan you money knowing that you won't be able to repay it, and they'll be able to repossess your house. All of these industries are controlled by the government in revolving door relationships. So the people who know enough to be in the government regulating it also have strong industry connections. Perhaps the worst we've seen of this is in pharmaceuticals, drugs, where not only did the drug companies come up with a solution for COVID that doesn't work terribly well, but they invented COVID itself. It's a very profitable business, not particularly good for us consumers. Okay, so that's how it works. You can't exactly trust them. So how do you find out the truth? Let me tell you my approach, the approach I'm using with radio frequency devices such as cell phones. First, I look at the science. Does the scientific story make sense? And this calcium story. And yes, it does. Mercola laid that out pretty well. Second, I look at whether big money is involved trying to tell me it's all safe and effective. Absolutely. The Apple computer and the cellular operators and the wireless manufacturers have a lot of money. Indeed they do. And they have an interest in telling you it's safe. So they have an incentive to lie and an incentive to get the regulators on their side. Going further, how many people are telling you it's unsafe and what's their track record? Well, Joseph Mercola seemed to be the only book that I found, and he has a pretty good record as a straight shooter, but he's only one, so that's a little bit down. So my conclusion with regard to RFID is that I'm going to follow his advice and do the easy stuff. Turn my Wi-Fi off when I'm not using it. Turn my cell phone off when I'm not using it. And don't let my kids stand in front of the microwave like it's a television. Tell them that when we're using the microwave, stand a ways away. Recognize the inverse square law. That is, if you double the distance away from a source of radiation, the power falls by 4. So if you stay away from things when they're in operation, don't sleep with your cell phone, you'll be better off. Okay, now, the radio frequency is one panic among many. So how should I prioritize that panic? What are the other ones? There are a couple that I've done videos on. Global warming, it seems to me to be absolutely bogus. The planet may be getting warmer, but it doesn't have to do with CO2, number one. And number two, we can't control CO2 because the Chinese and the Indians and the Russians don't want to control it. And even if we cut back strenuously, we won't cut it enough to make a difference. So global warming is bogus. Species extinction is likewise bogus. I did the arithmetic on that using the conservationists' own numbers and said it's about 1 or 2 species a year, if that, out of the million or so species, 1,700,000 that they've identified. And more than that, evolution's reproducing that, replacing those as we go. So those are bogus issues. Now, which issues do I consider real? One I consider very real is suppression of freedom of speech. I made a video just like this one about doctors, and it was taken down as misinformation. And this one might be too. So freedom of speech is one big issue, and there are a lot of books out there on there, but there's no big money coming in on the side of free speech. What's another thing? I think vaccine information, vaccine safety is a big one. No secret that the pharmaceutical companies are the biggest advertisers on TV and other media, and they want you to believe that they are safe and effective, but the evidence to me goes the other way. That's a bigger worry to me than my cell phone. What about glyphosate, Roundup? Yes, a lot of people are saying that there are these environmental toxins out there, and they're bad for us. My friend Stephanie Seneff has a book, Toxic Legacy, that I've reviewed. That's a bigger worry. So I'm going to cut to the chase here and say, in prioritizing my panics, I'm not going to panic that much about cell phones, about radiation frequencies. I am going to turn off my Wi-Fi, as I said, turn off my cell phone, but I'm not going to panic terribly. There are other things that deserve my panic a little bit more.